RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for making RealAg Live a part of your day. We really do appreciate it here. We have so much fun on these live broadcasts. Really get an opportunity to do a bit of a longer form discussion with our guests. And the best part is you get to participate with me. So if you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, you can participate in the discussion by entering a comment, a question in the comment box. And we really encourage you to do that. It's always a lot of fun to hear some of your remarks, your comments, but also your questions as well. And today, a very, very important topic, talking about some of the biotech, some of the technology issues that are out there. There's no shortage of, well, you know, in some cases, regulatory work that's being done, in some cases, activist pressure. There's a lot of things happening in the background. And sometimes we take some of these products for granted that you're using on your farm on a daily or yearly basis. And so we're going to get a bit of an update here today. Let's bring in today's guest. He is right here. It is Pierre Petelle. He is President and CEO of CropLife Canada. Pierre, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Shaun?
Hey, doing fantastic. So, Pierre, you're based out of Ottawa, correct?
That's right. Our head office is here, and our staff is located here, except for one person in Southern Ontario.
Okay. So, you know, let's start let's give some background. What does CropLife do, and who are the members? I think that's a good basis to start from.
Yeah, sure. So we're a trade association like many that exist, and we represent the plant science industry. So it's the companies that make your crop protection products, who make the traits in your seed, who distribute those products in the sector. Those are the members of CropLife, and so we advocate on their behalf.
And what kind of things are you advocating for? Like, can you give us some examples of what that kind of looks like?
Yeah, for sure. There are a number of issues that are common. I mean, these are fierce competitors, obviously, but there are a lot of issues that are very common to all of them. And we represent them on the regulatory side. So we try to make sure that the regulatory environment in Canada is attractive so that Canada and Canadian farmers get access to the latest technologies, whether they're chemistries or whether those are plant biotech traits. We want to make sure that Canada is at the forefront. There's also a lot of communication work that we do. There's a lot of disconnect, as growers will know, between the buyers of their products and the growers of those products. And so we try to do some work to bridge that. We try to dispel myths. We correct misinformation. We talk about the benefits of ag and the products that the farmers are using. So we do a lot of work on that front as well. And then the last part, focus area, is really around stewardship. We have a number of programs and projects that help growers ensure the proper use of their products, and we play our role as a collective industry to make sure that the products are being properly stewarded from start to finish.
You know, your job kind of reminds me a little bit of Chris White from the Canadian Meat Council. And a couple times lately, he's been on RealAg Radio, and I've sort of asked him some questions related to, you know, your members are fierce competitors, like down to the cent and the pound on a weekly basis, trying to buy cattle out of the country, you know, trying to do it efficiently. There's a lot of secrets that are involved. Your situation's the same in the sense that there's a lot of intellectual property. There's a lot, you know, there's millions of dollars in research, yet somehow these members come together for a common good for the benefit of all of them. It's got to be really, really interesting to lead a group like that.
Absolutely. And if you look at our board, I mean, you've got, you know, global multinationals, you've got Canadian companies specifically, you've got large distributors, small distributors, generics. I mean, everything from the full spectrum. And they truly do take off their company hats and work for the betterment of the industry. And believe me, there's a lot of work that's done collectively to try to make sure that, like I said, that Canada is left behind in the technology race that's happening.
So you mentioned that some of your work revolves around trying to make sure that Canada is a good place to do business, you know, trying to have, affordable regulatory framework, or however you want to put that. Is Canada a good place to do business for a lot of these companies trying to find a return on their, millions of dollars in research in the biotech space?
Yeah, so I would say both on the biotech and crop protection space, Canada's doing pretty well. We're not a big market globally for these products. I'll give you an example. On crop protection, we represent about 4% of the global market for pesticides. So it's, even though we grow a lot and export a lot as a nation, from a dollar perspective, we're not a huge player. So we've got to be at least as good as those big markets in attracting those technologies, because it's a full regulatory package. It's a full registration that you need to do in Canada, just as it would be in the US, although your return is the potential is much bigger in the US. So, so I would say, yes, we score quite well. And I would say on the chemistry side, we've really evolved over the past 20 years to a place where we are very competitive, and PMRA is the timing and predictability is very much in line with EPA. On the biotech side, I would say we were even ahead of most countries, because we were at the forefront of the biotech traits and on the GM technologies. I would say lately, the last few years, we maybe got passed a little bit on the biotech side. And there's with gene editing, that's more than just a thought now. It's actually in the ground in some places. Our regulatory environment has not kept up, and we're no longer sort of leaders in that area.
Are we moving at all closer to where Canada and the U.S. are, they're different markets, so size is one thing, but there's a lot of similarities on practices and things like that. Are we moving at all in the direction where there's a lot of streamlining, where these things are kind of being run in parallel and there's not, duplication of some of these efforts, or is that just a extremely tall order, never to be achieved?
You know what? On crop protection, I have to say, when you compare it to almost any other sector, it has done very well. So the EPA and PMRA do work together. They do joint reviews on crop protection. There's very few active ingredients that just come to Canada or the US. They usually come in jointly. The timing might be slightly off, but the applications come in jointly, and they do share the workload. So PMRA will be the lead on the health side, maybe EPA will be the lead on the environment side, and then they compare notes. And so there are some synergies there, and that has been a model actually globally, the Canada-US approach. And we've tried to get other countries to be part of that over the years with some success. But certainly on crop protection, that work together has really benefited Canada, especially on being the smaller market. On biotech, still early days, I think, of work sharing and collaboration. There are some little projects underway, and it was named in the new trade deal, North American trade deal, as an area of emphasis. So we see some promise there.
You mentioned gene editing. I believe the two scientists that invented or discovered CRISPR, they actually got the Nobel Peace Prize recently. Big shout out to them for that. Yet that technology not overwhelmingly accepted in some parts of society. You mentioned Canada and our relation to it, or where we are in the regulatory process. Can you dig a little bit deeper on that for us?
Yeah, so on paper, theoretically, our regulatory system should be 100% fine. We regulate on product, not process. So as long as it doesn't matter what technique you're using, technically, whether it's true GM or gene editing or just traditional breeding, it's really what the trait change is that matters, not how you got there. But in reality, that's not necessarily the way it operates. The technique or the process does matter, and we've realized through this last few years of our discussions and negotiations with CFIA and Health Canada that it matters quite a bit. Because there's that whole issue of public perception and the government not wanting to be caught on the wrong side of that issue. And so we've, I think we're generally encouraged as the direction we're going. We've moved the needle quite a bit. We're cautiously optimistic where we can get the system to be a little more reactive to those new innovations, because gene editing and CRISPR is just one tool, and there could be more coming down the pipeline. And so we want to make sure that this is future proof, that the changes we make sort of open the door for technologies for years to come.
Let's talk about Neonics. PMRA is doing a review. Where are we at with Neonics and this issue around the aquatic insects? I believe there was an update given recently on the timeline for their finding. Can you fill us in there?
Yeah, and there are quite a few of these deadlines that are coming because they parsed out the reviews of these neonics into chunks. So you've got sort of the pollinator chunk, which was completed. You've got the aquatic insect one, which is separate. You've got the regular sort of cyclical review, which is also underway. So I may not have the exact dates here fresh in my mind, but basically they've said that the aquatics decision, final decision, will come out next spring. And you'll recall this is the one where we saw the proposed decision was that the risks were unacceptable and that the risks to aquatic insects was too great and that they would remove all uses. So that generated quite a stir in the ag sector. And the last 2 years, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of data generated to try to demonstrate that the risks, that the detections in water are actually not as great as what their models were predicting. And so, hats off to Canola Council and Ducks Unlimited and a number of other groups who really stepped forward to generate data in addition to the registrants and provide that to PMRA. And PMRA, to their credit, wanting to make the best scientific decision, are taking all those data and sincerely looking at it to make the best decision. It's not, in my view, politically driven, despite a lot of the activist pressure.
Okay, well, I was wondering, is it a good thing that these reviews happen for products that are already approved in the marketplace? Is the idea here that new data comes out, new research, and so this evaluation should happen every so many years? And do other countries do this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so most countries do have some sort of a reevaluation system. Canada, it's minimum 15 years, and so is to make sure that products don't just get registered once and then stay on the market maybe as the science evolves. And so it's a way of keeping the products current and the science current. There are some improvements to that system that we're working hard to bring forward. And we're quite optimistic, actually, the direction that the PMRA is going and some of the proposed changes. But it is a good thing. I think it shows that there's, as the science evolves, as new data comes and emerges, that you're taking that into account in your decisions. And so the question is, though, when assumptions are being made or when there's not enough data and you're using very conservative approaches, that's where the problems come in, and that's where they've emerged on the neonic side. So in the absence of good water monitoring data, they modeled from very limited sources of data and extrapolated that across the prairies, and it didn't work, frankly.
Dicamba. So hugely controversial issue in the U.S. We have not seen the same level of occurrences of drift in Canada. There's a number of reasons for that, when it's being applied, being one of them. We saw a ruling last week from the EPA so growers can use it in the future, and they named the products that are under that. What's going on in Canada with Dicamba? Not the same level of noise in terms of challenges, but I'm sure there's things in the background that you're definitely working on.
Yeah, so the product is under special review by PMRA. So a special review is a little bit different than a reevaluation. A special review is when specific information comes to light, whether it's data or whether it's incident reports, so when registrants reporting complaints they've had or observations they've noted. A number of things can trigger a special review. So the over-the-top application of Dicamba is under special review by PMRA currently. However, they're going to be looking at the same sorts of data that EPA just reviewed for their decision, and our expectation is that they'll come to a similar decision.
Oh, sorry, you just froze there for a second, Pierre. Can you say that last sentence again?
Yeah, no. So I was just saying that PMRA will be looking at the same data that EPA just finished evaluating to make their decision, and we would anticipate a similar outcome.
Yeah, and so if there is a similar outcome, is there a timeline put on how far into the future before they can use that product, or is it like how does that work?
So in Canada right now, it is approved. So it wasn't like the U.S. where there was
Okay.
that judicial ruling and then they suspended use for a while. So we never had any of that here. So right now it's registered until it's not, and so unless that special review comes up with a very negative finding, the expectation is that it would continue to be approved for use.
Yeah, it definitely when it comes to weed resistance, is definitely if you follow a lot of the U.S. discussions that happen, such an important critical product for growers trying to tackle weed resistance. Losing products like that, although not new technology, but it's one of the tools in the toolbox. Boy, it would really leave a gap for a lot of producers. I would think that how challenging is it to communicate some of those things that are happening in the bubble of discussion around something like Dicamba? How hard is it to communicate that to like a government, somebody working a government, to make sure everybody understands all the moving parts here? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, it's not easy, and I mean we a couple of years ago we embarked on a managed weed resistance issue program called Manage Resistance Now, and we're hopeful that many of your viewers and listeners will be familiar with it because it is something that we want the industry to be aware of and widely used. But it was to try to get ahead of that sort of resistance curve that we were seeing the issues in the U.S. and trying to make sure that that everyone had a place that they could access most current recommendations for not just for weeds but for insects and fungus as well. But it is a constant challenge, and the idea, and we've seen this with the glyphosate debate, right? When people are saying, "Well, get rid of it," it's a suite of tools that are needed for weed resistance and for agriculture. And of course, people on this call don't need to be told that, but there's a lot of people who don't understand the importance of having the various tools, and like you said, a mixture of old technology, new technology, biopesticides, synthetic. We need them all. We can't. It's not an either or argument with these tools.
Is the industry in Canada facing the same level of activist pressure that is very, very prevalent in the U.S.?
I would say that it's evolving over time. I mean, the U.S. is always been more litigious, and the activist sort of playbook down there is to sue the EPA, sue whoever. Here, we never saw that until a couple of years ago, and then suddenly we saw through eco-justice funded by groups like David Suzuki Foundation and others using the courts. And we've seen a number of court cases against the Minister of Health, PMRA, to try to overturn decisions or to thwart the process and to make it sort of unworkable. And the latest one was around a Neonics decision last fall, and it wasn't to say ban the product, but they were effectively saying, well, when you make a change, we want it effective immediately. So basically, if a label change occurred, the farmer would suddenly overnight potentially be out of compliance. You could be spraying one day fully legal, and then the next day be out of compliance because there's no provision to sort of phase these decisions in. And so they're trying to use the courts to basically handcuff the industry and to make systems unworkable. And it also bogs down the PMRA and their resources, and they know that. So I would say they've become, I don't want to use sophisticated in a positive way. I mean,
Right.
they've become very savvy in how they approach things, and I would say they, in certain regions of the country, in Quebec in particular, they do borrow from the European approach and are quite successful at getting undue influence, in my view, with government.
Much more strategic. I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that we hear a lot from our RealAg audience, a bit of I would say frustration, is we'll talk about proper stewardship of a product, how to use it, and emphasizing that, oh, by the way, one of our main export markets for this does not have an MRL, and all the time, well, not all the time, but very frequently, the audience will say, well, why the heck not? Why are there just not MRLs that are either blanket across all export markets, or why are we leaving why are we not negotiating MRLs with all the different markets? Can you kind of dive deeper into this for us? Why not?
Yes. So why aren't my members doing their job?
Yeah, exactly. You said it, not me, but yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, this is an area of significant discussion and controversy. I mean, you look at when a company, especially a global company, when they're launching a new chemistry or a new trait, they are looking at all the trade pathways, projected trade pathways, and they are actively trying to secure those MRLs well in advance of launching the product in whatever market they're going to. So that is absolutely part of their whole commercial strategy, every single one of them. The challenge comes when we look at the unpredictability of some of those markets. And so you take, well, I'll use China as one example. A black hole sometimes. There's no sort of expectation of when you might get results, or there's not even really a predictable pathway sometimes to establishing that MRL or biotech trait approval. Europe's another example. They've got a process to allow for biotech trade approvals, but it can take 5, 6, 8 years sometimes. And so you may have the bulk of your market set and ready to go, but you may have a couple of significant ones that are primarily due to the completely unpredictable nature of the regulatory system. You may not even know when you might get a decision. So do you hold off on that new innovation indefinitely, and in hopes that that country will establish something, or do you sort of get a critical mass and at least get the innovation into the hands of growers and try to find ways to make sure that you're not jeopardizing those export markets? And that's the model that sort of we've landed on, right?
Okay, so this is an interesting thing a lot of people may not know. Who negotiates that MRL? Is it the manufacturer, the company that's selling the product, or is it CropLife, or is it the Canadian government? Who's negotiating that?
So it's actually the responsibility of the trait or chemistry owner. So in the case of a company, Bayer or whoever, Syngenta, they would actually have to apply for the import MRL for that product. It's no different than Canada. So for example, bananas or citrus, we don't grow them here. So companies have to apply for an import MRL. And so it's up to Bayer or all those companies to actually apply to the Canadian government in this case and ask for an import MRL for product A on bananas. And so the same occurs with our grains and oilseeds going to export markets. It's up to the tech developer to do that, and they do a really good job of establishing those trade pathways. But that unpredictable regulatory nature is something that's a real challenge.
This is one of those things that happens behind the scenes that we don't necessarily think of. Like, it's not our first thought, right? Is the floors of people that are working on these kinds of things, negotiating with export markets. The government's trying to make sure they have all the ducks in the row to make this all happen. So but it's obviously incredibly important work.
Absolutely, and the government does play a significant role, especially in the sense of when you do have a trade agreement in place. We've seen a lot of countries thwart the free trade nature by imposing non-tariff barriers. Italy was a prime example with their durum wheat. Yeah. There's a number of examples of countries that we have the MRL, we have everything else established, but now they're using the MRL as a non-tariff barrier, and that's where government can play a role in taking these countries to task.
Another piece of work that you focus on is also trying to assist in acceptability of some of the technologies and products that your members are producing. And recently, I believe you've done 2 seasons now of Real Farm Lives. We're focusing in on farms across the country and kind of showcasing some behind-the-scenes stuff on why they might need to use a herbicide or a fungicide or plant GM canola. How did that whole project go?
Yeah, it was very exciting, and it's very rewarding to try to talk directly to those end consumers. It's not an audience we've typically engaged with a lot directly, but there's a lot of groups that are in the space, and we think that industry, not industry, but the whole ag sector can do a better job maybe working together on some of that to really, because whether it's it's a livestock producer or a canola farmer or an apple grower, to the end consumer, it's agriculture. And so we all see these very different silos, but to the end consumer, they think of, antibiotics and hormones, they think of pesticides and GMOs, and it's to them, it's all lumped in. And so I think the more we can do to work together and really transmit that positive message about agriculture and the importance of it, I think we could do a lot better as a whole industry. But the Real Farm Lives was, you don't see any sort of CropLife branding. It's not intended to be an infomercial. It's really about trying to draw a connection between the farmers and the end consumers. And the results we've gotten have been very positive. And what we've also discovered is that people, it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take years of indoctrination to get them to understand. A few positive messages and a relatability to a family that's just like theirs, and boom, a lot of their concerns about some of that stuff just goes away, or it goes far down the priority list.
Lots of attention for the Percy movie, which really looks to uncover a storyline of what happened between Monsanto and Percy Smyser, farmer from Saskatchewan. Very, very famous Canadian, Canadian drama, or Canadian, went all through the courts. Have you seen the movie, and what are your thoughts on it?
I have not. I'll reserve my comments. I think I have gotten some feedback from other people who've watched it. I think it's more of a story of David and Goliath rather than sort of are GMOs safe or not. I mean, look, this guy was it went all the way to the Supreme Court, right? And so it wasn't sort of alleged or whatever. This used all the judicial channels in our system and still ruled on the side of the company. And so I think whatever your views of it are, is, to me, it was more just a Hollywood dramatization of a David and Goliath rather than a sort of a judgment on the technology itself. I mean, obviously the allegation is that he was stealing the technology. So I think the value of it and the value of GM canola and what it's meant for Canada has been is undisputed even by this movie. So.
Do you find it unusual that the Monsanto name really doesn't even exist anymore after the acquisition by Bayer, yet activists and people against GM are still using Monsanto as really the flagship of who to fight against, even though it doesn't really even exist anymore?
Yeah, I don't know how much that name resonates. I think in the activist community, it's to use an expression of one of my colleagues, it's like a dog whistle for. I mean, it was the terminology, the name that sort of had that visceral reaction in the activist community. So they continue to use it unabated. I think to the average consumer, they don't really. It's not a big name anymore. It's not a big deal. The issue is really whether or not they have questions about modern agriculture, pesticides in general, some of these technologies being used, and I think that's where all of us have a role to play to sort of provide the real story behind that.
Pierre, has COVID-19 had any impact at all on your members trying to do research, work with PMRA to get approvals on products? Like how is COVID, and obviously social distancing, a lot of people working from home, some people probably not able to go to their lab if they're working for the federal government. How has all that impacted your members' work?
Yeah, certainly. Initially we were all working very hard to make sure that supply lines weren't inadvertently affected by some of the border closures and that kind of thing. And that all seemed to, I think everyone got the products that they needed to get the seed in the ground and the chemicals applied. So, we spent some effort there. I think the regulators and government in general had a couple of months of trying to get used to work from home. They weren't really set up for that. And so there was a bit of a lull here, in certain files, but for the most part, everything's sort of back on track when it comes to regulatory approach. And I would say even, the Ag Committee and the political machine has now sort of found its way back to whatever normal it is here in Ottawa. But you're able to meet with ministers, you're able to meet with their staff and get your points across. And so it's certainly not the same as it was, but it's gotten back well, it's found a new way. I think that the main thing for us is what COVID has done sort of on a broader scale in terms of our economy. And when we look at this huge deficit that we're all going to have to deal with, one of the things that we're actively pushing is to really promote agriculture as not the magic bullet, but it's certainly a positive light in all of this darkness. And we want government to recognize that ag can play a significant role in helping rebuild the economy, and that we really need, now's the time especially, to get some of those regulatory impediments out of the way and really enable agriculture to get us to the next level. And we use this term, the own the ag podium, and those of you that recall the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, it's really about enabling everybody to make sure that ag can succeed. So whether it's infrastructure, transportation issues, broadband, regulatory, all the things that are sort of just keeping ag at a certain level, to really invest in those areas and really get out of the way in other areas, and really let agriculture succeed. So that's from the COVID story, that's really the push that we're trying to make.
How well is that understood? I've heard you talk about this, early in the days of COVID, when we were talking about supply chain possible disruptions. Is this understood by the federal government that there is a lane, a pathway here for agriculture really to be one of the leaders out of this economic situation?
I think even pre-COVID, you saw the Dominic Barton report where, a non-ag person sort of said, wow, this sector's got tremendous potential, and, you guys should do this, this, and this. And it aligned very nicely with what the ag sector was asking for. We saw these economic strategy tables get formed pre-COVID as well, and they came up with similar lists of recommendations as to what we've been pushing. And so now there's the ag strategy tables 2.0 are sort of, and it looks like they're going to have even more of a prominence, if you will. And so, we're going to continue to keep pushing that. And I think there is a recognition in the central and finance and treasury board, some of the central agencies that maybe this ag message is starting to resonate. And so we're optimistic.
Good stuff. I'm glad to hear the optimism. Hey, Pierre, I really appreciate you joining us here today on the show.
I appreciate the opportunity, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
That is Pierre Petelle from CropLife Canada. He's the president and CEO. Great to chat with him. There's some such important work being done behind the scenes that you don't see on your farm necessarily, but that good work from CropLife is really enabling you to be able to continue to use or be able to use new products that are coming to the market. So I really appreciate Pierre joining us here today. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk to Dr. Boyd Morey. We're going to talk about insects. That's going to be a lot of fun. Carrie Oosterhouse will be your host here on RealAg Live. Make sure you tune in to RealAg Radio today on Rural Radio 147 at 4:30 Eastern. It's Agronomic Monday. And my final promo is actually tonight. It is our premiere episode of a new streaming show. It will be at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, so it's in prime time. This is going to be a lot of fun. The new show is called The Agronomists. We're going to be joined by Marla Rickman of the of Manitoba Agriculture and Peter P. Johnson, and we're going to talk about compaction and the impact that it has on your fields and how that translates to yield loss and all those kinds of things. So it's going to be a lot of fun. 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain. It's called The Agronomists, and you can find it on all of our social media channels, just like you watch this show. So please join us. It will be live, and you can participate while we're hosting the show with your questions and comments as well. So great stuff. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.